There are many neurotransmitters, but there's 5 basic neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. From these 5 neurotransmitters, you mix them together, kind of like a chemist, in different levels, different ratios, and they produce different emotions. I compare them to 5 paints. If you have 5 colors of paints, every single color and hue that you see, you can make from these 5 basic colors. But it's a mixture of the colors. If you want to make green, you mix the blue and the yellow together. If you want to make pink, you mix white and red together. So mixing all of these, you can get every single color. You with me so far?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. What you do, let's say we're going to paint a beautiful sunset. You will take the paintbrush, dip it in, and paint the canvas, let's say a light blue to start it out. Then you might want a little bit of yellow or orange looking at. Typically what you do is you clean out the paintbrush before you use the next color. Because if you don't, the colors start mixing.
Yeah, it gets all yucky.
Right. Everything will end up becoming grayish looking or a dulled look. That's how it is with the neurotransmitters. So what's wrong with their theory of doing reuptake inhibitors is the fact that without the body's ability to clean out the synapse in between, the neurotransmitters are going to mix differently than what the pure emotion would be. So let's say,
they start getting muddy.
Right. The emotions start getting gray. That's what a lot of people tell me. They'll say, I'm not happy. I'm not depressed anymore, but I'm not really happy. I don't really get excited. No, all my emotions just seemed really, really dulled. And just like the paintbrush, you can see that. If you have... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can you still have some emotions that are sharp and distinct?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
But they'd have to be really, really intense emotions.
Yeah, like anger. Like you get angry at something and it just like consumes you. But other than that, you don't care one way or the other what's going on.
Right.
Does that also make you forgetful?
It
Does
can.
that make you forgetful?
It can. It can make you muddled thinking.
Okay.
More than forgetful. More like a muddled thinking. But good questions. Usually a thin myelin sheathing, though, and a lack of fatty acids can cause forgetfulness. That's one of the signs that you're lacking fatty acids. So a lot of people tell me that I don't want to live like this. I want off my medication because I hate the feeling of gray in my life. My whole life is gray. So do you understand the concept of that?
Sounds like my brother.
Really? Well, there you go. Is he on anything like that?
He's on Wellbutrin.
There you go. Yep. Very common complaint with people. Now, they're doing this medication because they realize that the person is lacking neurotransmitters. They can't really test it. I mean, they could. Let's say the medical profession doesn't test it, although there is a urine test that you can do. They'll let you know if a lot of neurotransmitter are being spilled into the urine, because that's how the body, when it uptakes it sometimes, the excess, it'll dump it in the urine. So you can see an improvement like that, but most doctors don't test for that, but they go by your symptoms. And if you have symptoms of lacking neurotransmitters, they put you on that kind of medication. Well, as I said, the thicker the myelin sheathing is, the more potential of releasing the neurotransmitter. So, if it's nice and plump, it'll release enough and it'll be able to reuptake enough. It'll be able to work exactly the way that it was intended to. However, if the myelin sheathing is very thin, it cannot release as much. So rather, yes?
Can you tell us what weakens the myelin sheathing? What makes it thin?
Good question. We're going to get into that, I believe, next.
Okay.
Okay?
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay.
We will get into that. I'm glad you're thinking ahead. All right, so the thicker that it is, so my idea, rather than to keep it from being able to work and try to block it reuptaking, is to make it nice and thick and healthy so it can release and reuptake enough. Before we get to that, Carolyn, I'd like to tell you how I got into this or understood the connection. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I had a lot of health problems. And Karen, you can probably remember when we went down to Amy's and did the iridology course.
Right.
Well, the person who looked in my eye told me I had no autonomic nerve wreath, and that's what this thing is I'm outlining right now. In the eye, that's called the autonomic nerve wreath, and everyone should have that. Well, whenever she looked in my eye, she said, "You don't have one of them." So I asked Ed Bashaw is the one who taught us. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, that indicates the thickness of the coating on your nerves, the myelin sheathing." I said, "Well, what do I do for it?" And he said, "I don't know. I never work with it. I don't work with it, so I don't know." So I went home and I looked up myelin sheathing, and I looked into absolutely all the medical books that I could and tried to find out what the myelin sheathing was made of, because I figured if it was weak, the body would need the nutrients to repair it. Kind of made sense to me.
Logical.
Yep.
So I started taking B vitamins, and I started taking a lot of fatty acids and herbs that were known to nourish the nervous system. In the process of all that, I used to have something called Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and it really was blossomed whenever I was married. But after I was divorced, it started going away a little bit on its own. It wasn't quite as intense. So the fact that it was going away, I just thought was because it was getting better, because I was divorced and not under all that stress. But I later started to read other people's eyes, and whenever I would see that the myelin sheathing was thin, I would tell them and suggest the things that I had used, that I had researched. And people were coming back to me and saying, "You know what? I used to have obsessive compulsive disorder, and I don't have it anymore." So I kind of, yeah. So after a couple times, it wasn't right away. It took a couple times for them to flick the switch before I noticed. But when this happened enough times, I'm thinking every one of these people had a thin myelin sheathing, and that's how I got the connection. There's other things that can show in the eye. Called stress rings. It's kind of hard to see, but there's like little things that look like ripples of water here. That also indicates stress in the body. But see, this has a nice ropey, not real thick, but a nice, I wouldn't even say ropey, just a nice shaped myelin sheathing, or thickness of myelin sheathing. And this one has hardly any.
Yeah, I can't hardly see it.
Right. So, after I realized that there was a connection, I started doing a lot of research. And I found out that the neurotransmitters, reuptake inhibitors, that they use it for things like ADD, depression, OCD, panic attacks, and sometimes for mild schizophrenia. Well, doing studies, especially now, because whenever I first started, there was very little studies on any of that. But now, if you would go into Google and type in Harvard University and omega-3 fatty acids, you'll find out that they've done a study showing that fatty acids can help with ADD, depression, OCD, panic attacks, and schizophrenia.